All righty. I think we'll start, and as people come in, I think they'll catch us up where we are. Thank you very much for joining us today in the first of our series of the webinars on Let's Talk About It. I am your anchor today and not co-chair. I'm your anchor. Your co-chair today is Leonora, who's on the screen with the ladies in Yorkshire. There's 5 of you in Yorkshire. Welcome, everybody. This hopefully is going to be a very candid series, and we hope that we're able to unpack topics that we don't normally talk about in church, unpack topics that affect us, but we're not everybody's conscious that they're affecting us, and it's important for us to bring them to the fore. This is in keeping with our mission as MWiB, to empower women, to seek justice, and to make Christ known. But in doing that, we're doing that by being a supportive community. And so today we're going to dive into a very interesting topic for me anyway, because I need to know everything there is, because shortly I'll be holding up a fan and then I'll be clutching onto a jacket because I'm going through that phase. So we're going to talk about menopause. And if you saw the advert, hot flashes, hot topics. We're going to have 2 perspectives. And we were going to have 2 speakers. Unfortunately, the other speaker, who is a deacon based in the Cheshire area, who her name is Jane Manfredi, is unable to join us today because she contracted COVID yesterday. She is the author of a book, Waking the Women, Faith, Menopause, and the Meaning of Midlife. I urge you to look for the book and read it. I've sort of read through parts of it to get myself ready today, but it is a very interesting book. And the background is she wrote this while she was at Queen's, and they were given topics to write on, and she picked a totally different topic because nobody ever talks about it. We've also got Menesia Chikazi, who is our trustee for the area, Northampton, Notts and Derby. But today we receive her as a nurse with nutritional and clinical background, and she's in the middle of studying her clinical nutrition masters. So she's going to unpack the clinical side of menopause and what goes on biologically in our bodies. Within the book from Jane, which we still will use today because we've got the information and permission from her, we will unpack how that relates to our spiritual life. After we've heard those 2 parts, we're going to open it and unpack it for questions and answers. Well, hopefully we can provide answers or we can discuss. And we're hoping this session is a conversation starter where we don't end when this webinar ends, but you can take it back to your circuits and start being ambassadors of, well, I don't want to say ambassadors of menopause, but ambassadors who encourage talking about difficult things or personal things within your churches, your circuits, one of them being menopause. So I'll introduce Menesia as she comes in. She has said to us earlier that she will try and not make the wording, the terminology difficult, because not all of us are studying masters in clinical nutrition. So some of the jargon may not be as simple to us, but she will unpack. Welcome, Menesia.
Thank you. Thank you for introducing me. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here. It's indeed my joy and pleasure to be with you and to discuss about menopause tonight. So we're going to, talk about something very natural yet often unspoken about, as my sister Oliver's indicated, especially in our church communities. In the Bible, we often hear about different seasons. Sorry, I'm just going to share my screen here for with my PowerPoint before I start, just so you can move along with me as we discuss together. So, so I'm going to go ahead with the presentation. Okay, so, you know, in the Bible, we often hear about different seasons, a time for everything, as in Ecclesiastes 3. Just as there are many seasons in nature, in our spiritual walk, our bodies also go through different seasons. And menopause is one of those natural God-designed seasons. It's not an illness, as some people may indicate, but it's a transition, much like puberty and pregnancy, where our bodies go through profound changes. So our aim tonight is to understand these changes better, what's happening, why we might feel certain ways, and how we can care for our bodies, minds, and spirit. And importantly, how we as a community can support and uplift each other, just like in every season of life, we are stronger together. So the physical changes that do go with menopause are listed here. Are you able to see what I'm seeing? Can you see my screen? Thank you. All right. So menopause is itself when you haven't had a period for 12 months. It usually happens between the ages of 45 and 55. That's the average age across the world. So perimenopause is actually what most people think is menopause. And it's usually the run up to menopause. It's like autumn before the winter. During this time, our ovaries are gradually slowing down, and the hormone levels of estrogen and progesterone, they rise and fall unpredictably. And that's why periods may become irregular, sometimes heavier, sometimes lighter, and sometimes close together or further apart. So now, why do symptoms happen? It all comes down to the estrogen, which affects many parts of our body. We often think of it just as our reproductive, the womb being the only place where estrogen has an effect on, but it has effects across the body. And that's why we have hot flashes and night sweats, which happen because estrogen itself, it helps to regulate the body's temperature. And that's when these levels drop, the brain's thermostat, which controls our body temperature, it gets confused because it does depend on estrogen to actually regulate the body temperature. And when it gets confused like that, this triggers the flushing and sweating, the hot flashes. So it tends to think that your body is too hot. And then in trying to drop down the temperature, it sort of like dilates the blood vessels close to the skin, and in order to drop the temperature. And this is when you get the hot flashes and the sweating, as it's trying to actually think that it needs to drop down your temperature. And these sweats can actually lead to sleep disturbances. But sleep disturbances are quite common, both because of the night sweats, but because also estrogen influences brain chemicals that help to regulate our sleep. And these are serotonin and melatonin. So serotonin, which is the hormone that makes us happy-go-lucky during the day with that energy to get up and go. And melatonin, which is formed from serotonin, and which helps to trigger sleep. Like right now, I'm sure pretty much of all of you are actually trying to, or feeling quite sleepy already, or trying to get to sleep, or your body is actually getting a little tired to prepare for sleep. And that's the effect of melatonin. And when estrogen is quite low, we often find that this hormone can also be triggered to be low. And that's why we find it hard to sleep or to trigger sleep. The other effects of low estrogen is the joint and muscle pain, which occur because estrogen protects the tissues around the joints, and so it reduces inflammation. So without it, stiffness and aches are more noticeable during menopause and perimenopause. We also find that vaginal dryness and intimacy also changes. These arise because estrogen keeps the vaginal tissues moist and elastic. And when less estrogen becomes an issue during the menopause and perimenopause years, these tissues become much thinner and drier, and so less flexible. And that's why it tends to get really irritable around the vagina and quite sensitive. Skin and body changes also appear because estrogen does support collagen. So collagen keeps the skin plump. And when levels fall, skin becomes drier and thinner. And that tends to redistribute around the middle. We also find that bone health is one of the most important areas where challenges do occur due to estrogen dropping. Estrogen does protect the bone density. So without it, the bones weaken faster, raising the risk of osteoporosis. And osteoporosis is one of them silent conditions which are usually predicted when somebody has a fall and has a fracture during these years. This is why looking after bone health during and after menopause is so vital. We also find that during the menopause, we have emotional and mental issues, mental health issues. So let's talk about these emotional and the mental health side of things. Mood changes do happen a lot because estrogen and progesterone influence serotonin, the hormone that I told you earlier on, the happy hormone, and dopamine, which are mood chemicals. When hormones fluctuate, moods can swing quite quickly, and this can cause anxiety and stress and brain fog. Anxiety and stress are more likely because the brain's calming pathways are less supported. Progesterone, which has a natural calming effect, is also reduced. And so we tend to have, brain fog, and you usually see this as misplacing things, losing words when you're trying to have a conversation, difficulty concentrating and focusing on things. And it is due to estrogen's nerve role in in nerve communication, and it's not dementia. And I often find that some of our friends, because of lack of knowledge of understanding that this is a hormonal change, tend to label others and be quite judgmental. And that's why it's very important to really understand the why behind all these changes, and also for your own mental well-being, to understand that you're not mad. Your body is just going through a process and a change, and you just require the right safe and appropriate way to deal with it. We also find that poor sleep makes everything worse. I mentioned about how sleep is affected. And once we have poor sleep, it just makes everything worse. It lowers our resilience to stress and emotions. So we often get really quite upset, tearful, and very irritable with things, particularly during the perimenopause phase. This usually happens in the second half of the month, just prior to menstruation, when progesterone drops quite quickly or quite dramatically. And this often tends to also then affect, self-esteem and relationships. And as the body changes, the skin, the intimacy may also, alter our confidence. And finally, feelings of loss. Menopause marks the end of fertility, which can bring a sense of grief and aging or aging, but it can also be reframed as a new chapter of freedom and wisdom. The Bible reminds us through stories of women like Hannah and Naomi. Hannah poured out her grief to God when she felt misunderstood, and Naomi renamed herself Mara, meaning bitter. After loss, both women show us that the emotional struggles are part of the human journey, but their stories didn't end there. God heard Hannah, and God restored Naomi's hope through new relationships, and um, um, having engagement with other people who resonated with her. So it is with menopause as well. These emotions are real, but God meets us with compassion, and we'll be hoping that within our churches, this compassion gives us a new beginning in terms of understanding ourselves and also being part of community and not feeling isolated. When we understand the biology, we can respond with compassion rather than judgment. And instead of thinking she is moody, she's forgetful, we can think that her body is in transition. She needs care, not isolation. So understanding can lead to compassion and build support, which strengthens our communities and the people affected. Now, what can help in terms of practical strategies and treatments? Now, I'm not a doctor. I don't prescribe either, but I'm going to just give you some information regarding the strategies that are used in conventional medicine, like HRT, which is hormone replacement therapy. As I mentioned earlier on, hormones like estrogen and progesterone tends to decline, and I'm sure there's some of you here that have been on HRT or been offered HRT. This replaces the declining hormones, estrogen and progesterone, and it can be very effective for hot flushes, for night sweats, for mood changes, for bone health, but it is a personal decision. And always, the safest is to discuss with your GP for safe and appropriate care. You will find there are people out there who will offer this help, and make sure they're qualified, make sure that they have the credentials, and more often they should be able to link with your GP if you're going to get a private person to look into this for you. Because then you can be monitored by your GP for any effects that may occur thereafter, because most of us or some of us don't respond very well to HRT. There are also non-hormonal medicines for women who cannot take HRT. These are the alternatives. And basically, my approach to easing the way through menopause includes dietary and lifestyle recommendations, because these really do help to restore your health. And also nature the balance of hormones, because once your ovaries stop making estrogen, it starts being mad in other parts of the body, like the adrenals. So balancing your diet to balance the hormones and also lifestyle measures tend to really help to ease some of the symptoms of menopause. There are also local treatments that doctors do prescribe, like vaginal estrogens, creams, moisturizers that restore comfort and sexual health. And they're talking therapies as well, like CBT, counseling. You can actually self-refer on some of the websites. I'll be able to actually give you a link where you can self-refer for some of these therapies, because they are now very difficult to get through your GP for some reason, but you can self-refer online. The waiting time may be quite long, but it does help to really be patient enough to get through and get some support on how to manage things like stress, which tend to exacerbate the menopausal symptoms. I just wanted to say that, where there's no guidance, as in the Bible says as well in Proverbs 11:14, a people falls, but in an abundance of counselors, there is safety. So seeking help is wisdom and not weakness. So don't be afraid to talk to your GPs, your local nurses, or your local menopause specialist practitioners. There's a website where you can actually go and find a menopause specialist in your area. Most of them actually do work well, like link with your GPs. I always advise that you need to get a specialist, a private one, if you have to and you can afford it, who is linked to your GP. Always make sure that's important, because then they will make sure that you communicate with your GP, or they'll support you to communicate with your GP on strategies that they will be doing with you, so that you can be monitors in terms of the medications that you'll be taking, and ensure that you're not, there are no interactions with the medications that you'll be taking, because most people will already be on other medically prescribed medication, which can interact with some of these therapies if they are supplements. Okay. So alongside treatment, lifestyle makes a huge difference. Good sleep habits, a cool room, a good sleep routine, avoiding caffeine and alcohol late at night or late in the day. I always say after 12 midday, ensure you don't take any caffeinated drinks or alcohol, because this will really help as well to let those biological clocks or hormones that are generated to work well and be stimulated in the normal way, because alcohol and caffeine do really interfere with those sleep chemicals we're talking about earlier. A balanced diet is very, very important, but more particularly important is calcium and vitamin D, which are very vital for bones. Again, it is very important to work with your GP when you are at this life stage, and ensure you know what your vitamin D levels are, and ensure that you're taking vitamin D every single day, especially here in the UK when we don't have the daylight available throughout the day. We need to be taking vitamin D every single day, and there are guidelines on how much vitamin D you should be taking every day. But I always recommend that it's important you know your levels, because they are very, very important in ensuring that you have optimal health, optimal hormonal balance. Because vitamin D itself is not a vitamin, it's a hormone, and it is the same structure. It's, in how estrogen is formed in the body to then become the active form. So it has that anti-inflammatory effect that I was talking about, and it also has effect on the brain, the mood, the anxiety, and all other well-being issues. Relaxation is also very key. Mindfulness, prayer, building better communities and engaging with others. You can also, have menopause groups or women's groups where you engage just generally in things that excite you or is common to you. Gentle yoga or and deep breathing exercises to calm the nervous system and to reduce symptoms. Clothing, light layers, you try and get onto cotton clothes because they are really much better in maintaining our body temperatures than nylon and polythene and all those kind of materials. Fans as well can help manage hot flashes. I see some people have these little portable fans wherever they go, and they can fit into a handbag. The other thing is exercises. I cannot stress enough about exercises. Gentle walking, yoga, anything that you can use your body for strength, to strengthen the muscles and supporting the bladder, you know, um, supporting bladder control and intimacy. Because we find that during these years as well, the pelvic floor muscles tend to be affected. And so there are pelvic floor exercises that also strengthen these muscles and reduce problems with urinary incontinence. Supporting yourself and others is one of the very important strategies that we can also use during menopause. Menopause doesn't have to be lonely. Sharing openly breaks silence and shame. Listening with encouragement, it builds compassion in families and churches. Sometimes people just need to talk. They don't need to be judged. They don't need to be answered. And seeking help from a GP or a clinic is a wise choice if symptoms interfere with daily life. Most GPs now or GP surgeries do actually have a team of doctors that are mainly dedicated for menopause. So if you're experiencing any of these symptoms, do get in touch with your GP surgery and inform and ask them if you can be linked to a menopause doctor and discuss your issues. And when is it that you need to seek medical advice? This is very important. Some symptoms are not just menopausal, okay? And some symptoms which are menopausal, can actually be caused by other diseases, and they need checking. Things like heavy or unusual menstrual bleeds, or just heavy irregular menstruations, or bleeding after sex, severe depression or thoughts of self-harm. These are very common in perimenopause and menopause. Persistent sleep loss, and also any new unexplained pain. All these are very, very important to ensure that to check with your GP to rule out other medical issues that may mirror menopause. Your health matters to God. So really seeking help is not a lack of faith. It is using wisdom and care He has provided through all these resources and services that are available to us. In closing, I just want to encourage hope and hold on to all these truths that I have just mentioned to you. That menopause is very, very a natural process. It's not shameful. It can be a season of growth and freedom. It can be a season of forming new relationships and community. If we lean more on faith, prayer, scripture, and community, and support each other as sisters and family in Christ, we'll find that less people will really struggle through this life stage, will really become less isolated, become more confident in themselves and the people around them. So you know, as we know that God declares that He's our refuge and strength, we can then let ourselves speak freely, care with compassion, and walk in season together in Christ's love, knowing that we are doing this to free each other and make each other very comfortable around ourselves. So menopause is a natural part of life, but with understanding, faith, and sisterhood, it can become a season of wisdom, freedom, and growth. I thank you, and I hope it's very condensed, the information I've given you, and I hope that I'll be able to, me and my colleagues will be able to answer your questions as we go along tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Manesia. Thank you. That's, well, almost describing me to the T with a fan somewhere, sitting somewhere. And it's encouraging that Manesia is encouraging other people to understand the changes that happen, and possibly not only with menopause. Now, before we go on to our questions and answers, I'm sure we've got lots of questions. I'm just going to go through Jane's book. The author's name is Jane Manfredi. I had several questions that were coming through on what the name of the book is. The book is called Waking the Women, Faith, Menopause, and the Meaning of Midlife. I've put it in the chat. It's £12 on Amazon, and you'll get it tomorrow. So if you want to read on it, but I'll just look at 3 or 4 points that she talks about within her book. Some may have been touched by Menesia, but she goes into depth in all of these. And one of the things she says is menopause is not just a medical condition to be managed, but a profound spiritual journey and a death and resurrection of sorts. It's a time when we are called to let go of old identities, the roles we have played, the expectations we have carried, and the physical selves we have known, in order to receive something new. She also speaks of the loss of fertility not as an end, but as a freedom, and encourages women to embrace this death of their younger self, because it's only then that they can be resurrected into a new, a more authentic and unburdened version of themselves. She's also spoken about the anger, the emotions. I think Menesia mentioned the emotions that women feel, to embrace that anger and not to try and stifle it. Because what tends to happen is when we feel embarrassed about the emotions that we're feeling, that we've snapped about something, and that embarrasses us. But to embrace that it is a journey, and we shouldn't be embarrassed, and we should be able to reach out and say, look, I'm probably going to snap because I'm feeling this way because of what I'm going through physically. And therefore, I'm not the self that you knew me to be. If I was a softer person, I'm irritable all the time. I'm anxious all the time. It's things like that. She ultimately talks about passionate call for the church to break its silence. And she writes that we're a demographic that is ripe for harvest, with gifts to be shared and a newfound spiritual authority. So it should really come from us. Why should we allow for someone to talk about us when we can speak better about ourselves to other people? So if we want men to understand us, or people who've gone past, there are people who are lucky who haven't gone through all of the symptoms that Menesia was telling us about. And I know some of my friends who are thinking, oh, I feel sorry for you. You've gone through A, B, C, D, and they haven't done. So they don't understand it when I snap about a pen that's fallen and it's made a lot of noise, and instead of responding with 10% response, I'm responding at 100%, and it doesn't balance. So we're all personally built differently, and this is what Jane Manfredi tries to tell us in her book. She unpacks it in the sense of us as human beings, and how that step takes us to a new being, almost a new creation, and how we can embrace that new creation. Interesting read. I'm partway reading it. I haven't finished reading it. And I'm partly glad she wasn't here to ask me which questions on the parts I've read, because I haven't finished reading it, but I think I will. It's only 134 pages. So please get it if you can. Thank you very much, Manesia. That was a lot of information for us. And I think Manesia said she'll give us links for us to get more information on how to get the right supplements into our bodies, so that we remain healthy even after the symptoms of menopause. We're going on to our questions and answers session. Now, if there's anybody who's got questions that they'd like to ask, both that they would have asked from Jane. I've got her book in front of me, and I'm hoping I can sort of flip through to the pages. It's electronic, so I'll type in the question and hopefully the book will give me the answer. But also from Manesia, if there are any questions, please feel free to just either put up your hand. Leonora will be receiving questions. If you don't want to say them, if you have received any, Lee, have you received any typed questions? You're on mute.
Yes, I know I'm mute, and I've no idea how to find them, but never mind. No other questions have come in yet.
Okay. Any questions? Any hands up?
You got any questions?
If nobody does, I have a question that I'd like to ask, and this is more on the physical side. In hormone replacement, there's a risk and the reality. We hear so much noise and fear surrounding hormone replacement. What is the single biggest misconception of hormone replacement? That's directed at you. Sorry, Manesia. Yeah.
Okay. I'm just trying to type out your question so that I don't forget it. I'll have it with me.
Well, yeah. What is the the biggest misconception of hormone replacement?
Okay, so hormone replacement therapy is quite a temporary measure. You know, you can't be on it for a long time. Like in the UK, it's only recommended for an average of 5 years. So when you do stop it, you find that obviously these hormones drop again, and so we come back to the same problem. Research shows that most healthy women under the age of 60, the benefits of HRT do outweigh the risks, and so the increased risk of breast cancer with combined HRT, estrogen, and progesterone is very small, much smaller than people think. So lower than risks linked to things like overweight, drinking alcohol regularly, or not exercising. You also find that estrogen only HRT for women who have had a hysterectomy does not increase breast cancer risk and may even lower it slightly, because I know that those are some of the areas people tend to talk about. HRT also reduces risks of osteoporosis, and broken bones, and helps to protect the heart if started at the right time. This is why it's important to engage with a doctor at an earlier time, especially when you're experiencing the hormonal changes and those symptoms that we mentioned earlier. So the misconception is that HRT is broadly unsafe. In fact, for the majority of women who need it, HRT is safe and an effective treatment when tailored by a healthcare professional. Okay, so we can do the test and find the necessity and appropriateness of the HRT for yourself. So that's as far as I can safe for you. There is an NHS website where you can go and find a lot more about HRT, the nhs.uk. You just type in /menopause HRT, and you will, or just nhs.uk, you will find a lot of information about HRT and its safety and the recommendations there. I hope I've answered your question adequately.
I think so. Anyone else? I've got tons of questions because I think this is, well, there's a question behind you, Lee. You're muted.
Oops, unmuted.
That's okay. I was just wondering, are there any particular food groups that are good for balancing hormones when going through menopause?
Oh yes, that's my area. I'm going to try my best to really come up with a leaflet of all a diet for a natural menopause approach, because obviously HRT and things like that are not for everybody, like we talked about, due to either hereditary issues or genetic predispositions. So the first step on diet, about diet with during menopause, I know we mentioned that estrogen has a lot to do with the symptoms that we tend to get, but in terms of diet, reduced saturated fat, this keeps down, we need to keep down intake of red meat, such as beef and cheese, because these foods are very high in saturated fats, which are not good for your heart. Saturated fats also make your body more acidic, and when your body is more acidic, it encourages calcium loss, and that is the last thing we want during menopause. Like I said, calcium is extremely important for our bones, bone health, and bone density, and and once it drops or it's lost, this increases risks of bone disintegration and ultimately, obviously, porosis, and we run that risk of frequent falls and fractures. Our diet also needs to be really good in essential fatty acids. So we're talking about omega-3 fatty acids, and these are extremely important in lowering inflammation in our bodies, and they also help to lubricate our joints. They also help to make our body cells, because our body cells are 2/3 fat and 1/3 protein. So the fats that we need to eat should be good fats, and these are essential fatty acids like omega-3s and monounsaturated fats, like from olive oil, olives, things like that. And these really tend to help right inside the body, and we tend to see these effects in good skin. Things like, also you find that omega-3s and essential fatty acids are in nuts, seeds, eggs, and they can also benefit the skin from dryness, the vaginal dryness that we've been talking about, painful joints, high cholesterol, and sluggish metabolism. And also a good diet that really stabilizes our blood sugars. During the menopause, it's so important to keep our blood sugars very stable, as our ovaries produce lower estrogen. Your adrenal glands, which take over pumping out alternative forms of estrogen in our bodies, can be quite affected with that. So if you are on a blood sugar roller coaster, your adrenal glands will have to work very hard, which will tire them out. So we really need to make sure that we eat a diet that is very low in sugar, and also fiber, very high fiber foods, from fruits, vegetables, whole grains. Department of Health really encourages that we eat 5 a day. This is one of the main reasons why we should be eating all color of vegetables, because they contain different types of antioxidants. These lower inflammation as well. So these tend which tends to help with these body aches we've been talking about. And also they do really help with, if you're eating a whole variety of vegetables, you're more than likely to, or vegetables of different colors, to get a lot of vitamins and minerals, a diverse range, which are all very good for helping different parts of our, health. So, and also eating quite a 5 a day or more than 5 a day if you can, particularly greens, which are very high in B vitamins, iron, and some also antioxidants, and the fiber, they're very high in fiber, which is very important and efficient way of supporting our detoxification pathways, to eliminate the old estrogens, because your estrogen, when used, it needs to be expelled through the body. And so if we don't take enough fiber, that tends to affect the expulsion of those estrogens because out of the body, and it raises the bad estrogens. They remain as toxins in our bodies, and what tends to happen then, we expose ourselves to different types of conditions like breast cancer, which is very high during the menopausal stage, or different types of womb cancers as well. We need to also to eat more phytoestrogens. Now, phytoestrogens mimic the estrogen that we tend to have in our bodies. So it's more like replacing estrogen from the food that we eat. And some of these foods that contain phytoestrogens are like soya, legumes, and they do play a big role in our diet, particularly in menopausal years. So I took things like chickpeas, lentils, kidney beans, aduki beans, and we often find that in countries like Japan, where they eat a lot of these phytoestrogenic foods, there is less incidences of perimenopausal symptoms and cancers as well. Whole grains like, which are also rich in fiber, tends to also help to make our bowels quite efficient and also reduce cholesterol. So as I said earlier on, you'll find that during the perimenopause years, in menopausal years, we tend to, fat distribution tends to be quite an issue, and weight gain and difficulty in losing weight. But we find if you have a higher a diet that is higher in fiber, those challenges tend to be quite minimal or easier to manage. There are things as well that we should really be thinking of reducing a lot more, like caffeinated drinks, alcohol, processed foods, because processed foods then take away the elements that we're talking about, the fiber, the vitamins and minerals. I think, yeah. In terms of supplements, there will be things like B vitamins. If you suffer from things like mood swings, irritability, tension, anxiety, depression, crying spells, and if your energy levels are quite low, it could be a case of also lacking B vitamins. So a B complex, particularly for women above 50 or around those at that age or above 40, are quite important because they do contain this sort of like correct clinical grade amount of B vitamin levels that you may require. Yeah. So vitamin C rich foods, vitamin E rich foods, and
thank you, Minister. That was great.
Yeah. Thank you.
Someone's asked a question: what's the best way of getting calcium if we're not to have cheese and things?
Okay, so calcium-rich foods. The best calcium-rich foods, I know most people tend to relate calcium with milk, semi-skimmed milk or whole milk, cheese and yogurt. Those are okay. They are non-dairy alternative. Green vegetables, green leafy vegetables, kale, broccoli, spring greens, bok choy, nuts and seeds. These are much higher in calcium than you can ever think in comparison to dairy products. Sesame seeds, tahini, and chia seeds, apart from providing you a high amount of calcium, they also balance the hormones that we're talking about, progesterone and estrogen. Don't think that you completely lose the ability to lose production of estrogen and progesterone. You will still produce them, but providing your body with these foods, which are not only high in calcium, also helps to balance the hormones in your body. So there are also other foods, fortified foods, some breads. So look at the labels. You find they will tell you that it's fortified with calcium. Plant-based milks like soya, almonds, and oats often have added calcium, but themselves as well, they have very high amounts of calcium, almond and soya milk, even without the added fortification. Fish with soft bones, I'm talking about tinned salmon, sardines, pilchards, and also other good sources are tofu for those that are vegetarians, figs, fruits, figs, apricots, oranges do not have a huge amount, but can be helpful, especially with a high amount of vitamin C, which we need.
Thank you
Okay.
very much. I didn't realize there was so much that contains calcium.
Yeah.
I'm aware that Charity raised her hand some time ago. So Charity, do you want to ask your question? No.
I think Charity's gone and written her question in the chat.
Oh,
if you can see it.
No, I can't.
Okay, it's I'll read it out, and if there's anything up. It says, if menopause is spoken of as loss, whose narrative is that? And what new story might women tell if we named it instead as liberation and rebirth? I think that is directed possibly to all of us, because at some point we must have felt that at the point that we couldn't have children if we want to have more, that there's a feeling of not being useful anymore for the youth that you were born into. There are people who feel like that. So what Charity is saying, if that is spoken of as a loss, whose narrative is it? And can we change that story? And might women tell it in such a way that is liberation and rebirth? And I think that can be found in Jane's book, but how do other people feel about that?
Something I heard tonight was that the word freedom. I've never thought of that before, but it really made a point with me. That's thinking that's not just it, that's a part of your life, but it's not the end. And have that freedom that I don't have to think about periods again, or if I'm going to get caught out and I go swimming, or especially when it's all hit and miss for the couple of years of perimenopause. So to have that sort of freedom that, I didn't think it's freedom, but I guess it is, and it's quite a positive way of looking at it.
I know when I sailed through it, I have to say, but I know that when I'd finally gone through, I felt that loss. I have 2 children, so it's not as if I hadn't had children, but I felt this loss because I identified myself as a woman as producing children. That was my role. Years and years ago, yes, it is freedom, and it is a liberation of allowing, but unless we identify the fact that it's freedom for us and we don't have that narrative of it's loss, etc., we can't help others. It has to, for me, start with myself.
I also wonder there was something about our understanding of menopause as a patriarchal and colonial understanding, where really women's role is to have children, is a source of labor, And in menopause or perimenopause, some of that is lost. And therefore, because we have lost that, we have bought into that narrative. But if we flip that side and tell that story from women's perspectives in our diversity, what might that be and what might that mean for our faith? In other words, telling our own truth about what it means to be woman. How might that help us understand menopause, inform faith, and enable growth for women? And I'm certain our experiences are not similar. Yes, we are all women, but our experiences are different. And menopause impacts us differently. And it can really be disabling for some people. I ended up with disabled badge during my perimenopause phase because I literally couldn't walk. It was really difficult. And for some people, they never have those kinds of experiences. I am through the other side now. But guess what? I'm a new woman. I say what I want, when I want, how I want to say it. And I really don't care who is around me. If I need to say something, I'll say it. I'll try to be respectful all the time. But I almost feel like I've got a new energy and I've got a new life. And I think for me, that's a blessing.
Thank you, Charity. Thank you. I'm just going to read a few of the comments that are on there. I think one of them is possibly for our resources department. A new line of MWiB stalls, a collapsible handheld fan with butterflies on it. You'll see a lot of those in Swanik, I think. We'll need them. And then somebody else has said menopause happens just when you don't want it, at the peak of the career, when most stressed at holding everything together and supposedly being successful. The sandwich moment of care of parents and also teenagers. And so the misery when the body seemingly falls apart is made worse. Can we tonight give 3 points we can offer to women approaching this phase that we can all do, not just the medics? My opening point is talk to me, talk to us. Don't be alone in suffering. What would other people emphasize? I think that question is something that we possibly can take away and ask each other, what can we do tomorrow? What are the 3 points, 4 points that we can take away in continuing this discussion? Somebody else said it's important to learn to be kind to yourself. Too often, because of so many other priorities, because of so many other things, priorities compete and women put themselves last. Self-care needs to become an accepted model. You cannot fill others from your own empty cup. And somebody else has said, Davina McCall, who's a celebrity, calls menopause as her second spring, after a Japanese word. Her book is called Menopausing. I think for anybody who wants to look that up, Davina McCall, Menopausing. And I found it helpful for thinking about the practicalities of perimenopause and menopause. For those, someone else has said, for those women who have not had the chance to bear children, the menopause is a time of loss that needs to be acknowledged before they can move on to liberation. So it's also allowing that healing before we acknowledge that they need to move on, because from freedom, from healing then comes freedom, because you can't be free unless you've healed and accepted that this is what it is. So those are the many points that we can pick from this. Friends, I was hoping this would be over a dinner table and we could sit the whole day and talk about this. And I think when some of you came in and tried to figure out what could we talk about on menopause, because we've been through it, we've spoken about it, we didn't think we could unpack so much on this topic. I encourage you to create groups where we heal, create safe spaces for our sisters to heal and go through spring, what will be a liberation point for them in speaking about this. I'll take my last comment from Charity before we have our closing points. Please go ahead, Sis Charity.
Thank you, Olive. I just wondered whether it might be helpful for us as a group of women of faith to tell our stories in writing, put them together into some kind of a book or something so that they can be a resource for other people. And I appreciate the medical advice that is available in abundance, but how can we add to that existing body of knowledge by telling our stories in a way that is accessible to other people?
Thank you, Sis Charity. I think that's a noble idea. That's a very good idea. I think for those who are willing to, or know anybody who's willing to do that, to tell their story, it would help other people and go through phases of allowing other people to speak about their own stories because they've heard someone else's story. Well, how eye-opening. A lot of things to unpack, and even for me, and I think for Leah and I, we were talking about menopause because we were unpacking a certain part of it that was possibly more physical than spiritual. And I think we've learnt a lot from it. And I think other people have learned a lot from it as well. What we're hoping to do, in addition, I think, to the suggestion of what Charity has said, is to create liturgy that can be used within different areas. And this will be for each and every topic that we take through during this series of webinar. Thank you very much, Menesia, for the insight in the information. I think if we could ask Menesia to provide us as much information, and I think, like she said, she compressed it. So many times I said to her, please make sure it's 20 minutes, please make sure it's 20 minutes. But there is so much information. We all wanted to know what we need to eat, what our next meal will look like tomorrow morning. One thing I caught on was the fact that she said we need to drink alcohol before 12. And I thought, oh, okay, well, that's not going to be very good for our meetings if we're having alcohol before 12 and not after 12. But anyway, I think what she's saying to us as it's to manage our alcohol drinking, our glasses of wine, so that our bodies are not dependent on the chemical balance of that alcohol. But thank you very much, Menesia, and I will send our thanks back to Jane Manfredi, who I will ask all of us to just pray for and keep her in your thoughts as she recovers from COVID, and hopefully she'll be able to come and attend. In one of her profiles, she says he will speak for a cup of tea and a biscuit. So maybe when you have your next our next groupings, we can call her physically and ask her to come through and unpack more what it means for us spiritually for a biscuit and a cup of tea. Friends, we've come to the end of our webinar, but I would like to remind you that this is the first of the series. If you would like to join the rest of the series of these webinars, on the 23rd of October, we'll be talking about intimacy. Intimacy, not in the physical sense, but in the sense of relationship. We'll be talking about, on the 27th of November, about female genital mutilation, which is said to be cultural, but I think extended may also be an abuse of culture. And we've got specialists who work in that, who run a charity, Forward UK, who are coming to speak to us on that. We've got specialists as well who deal with, on a day-to-day basis, on violence against women and girls, domestic abuse, and that's coming on the 26th of February next year. We've got social justice, poverty and money, poverty versus money. You might have a lot of money but still be poor. We'll have experts who will speak on that. We're going to speak about immigration, the dreaded I word. I don't think there's a bigger word that starts with I that is shaking TVs and the media, welcoming the stranger in more ways than one, and how we can equip ourselves to do that and be that, and open ourselves and our hearts to the diversity in the country. In June, we're going to talk about gender, sexuality, sexual identity, celebrating every beautiful part of God's creation, because we are all fearfully and wonderfully made. And then in July, we're going to talk about faith and politics, where that meets, and what we as a church need to do about that. So if you want to register for those, please email our communications department. Our email, please help me, Lee, the email address for the communication.
You go onto the link, and that will then bring up, and you can then tick which ones you want to go to. And
yes, to get the link if you're not on our website or Facebook. Yes.
You want oh heck, what's comms? communications.mwib@gmail.com.
So if you want to get in touch with either Lee or myself or anybody that you think might be interested in the topics that we're coming up on, there's one link that you can use to register for all of the ones, so you can select the ones that you want to come in for. So please go ahead and use that. But thank you very much for attending. Thank you for coming. Thank you for contributing. And thank you for the nods and shakes and hearts. We can see the hearts that are coming through. Somebody knows how to do that electronically. I will use this one because that's what I know. But thank you so much. And if you want assistance on how to unpack this in your area, by all means, please get in touch so that we can compile something and we can start to talk about it. Thank you.
I found how to do it now. There we go. We've got lots of parts coming up.
Thank you, everybody,
Okay.
and have a blessed
Thanks,
evening.
Olive. Thanks,
Thank you
Vanessa.
very much.